It wasn't exactly like a true tempo. I was like kind of skipping around all that. Ism's good.
I am good, pal. But I kind of want to take this opportunity to get a little serious for a moment.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, you and I both are very open-minded people, and we're very sympathetic to different groups, demographics of people, minority groups, fans of certain things. And the last episode, I said some stuff that I'm not proud of. I referred to this specific character in a way that a lot of people wrote me and are just not happy about it. And again, I'm not proud of what I said, but when I referred to this character as the crappy orange kid from the 1986 classic Silverhawks, a lot of people got upset because his actual name is the Copper Kid. Hey folks, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, pal.
Hey, man. I just know, I know you've been practicing. I can tell. You're doing your breathing exercises.
No, honestly, it's like the more I think about it, the it just gets twice as bad.
I'm super nervous. Yeah, it's kind of like what we talk about whenever you're like in line at the like a fast food restaurant, or someone hands you the menu and you know what you're gonna get, but then when the waiter comes, you're like, I'm kind of like that now too, man. You wore off on me.
Yeah, just pure confusion. I mean, especially because I always have to like preface with like no onions. I've just started saying that I'm allergic to onions.
Yeah,
and that goes down a little.
Yeah, okay,
little easier.
That's fair. Yeah, because most of the time they're going to ask you any food allergies, and you're like, yes, onions. Now that kid walking back to the back to put in that order is thinking to himself, "There's no such thing as an allergy to onions." I mean, I'm sure there is. But,
well, I mean, you never know.
But that's a good idea. That's intuitive. That's some good innovative thinking. I like it, and I like that you're holding yourself accountable, and you're apologetic about all those Copper Kid advocates out there. And so
there's a lot of them.
We salute you.
We salute you. We really do. One interesting thing, which actually kind of ties into our episode today. Have you seen a photo of the Copper Kid in a while?
I mean, yeah.
And if you guys are out there, have no idea what we're talking about, we're talking about the crappy orange kid from the Silverhawks cartoon. But no, so I looked him up, and this is kind of weird. And I feel like, is there a little like tie-in with what we're doing today, and like maybe Sam the Sandown Clown? So he's the only one in the group that's from a different planet, and he's from a planet called the planet of mimes.
Ooh.
He speaks in tones and whistles, and his face is painted like a jester or clown.
Man.
I mean, and he has large, like pointed ears, which will play into what we're talking about today.
How about buck teeth? Just kidding. I mean, one of the messages that we got from an apparent Copper Kid advocate was from our buddy Christian, and he sent us that, and you described all of those characteristics, and I didn't even notice them, because I just immediately remembered like, oh yeah, the Copper Kid. I didn't even think about his origin and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I had totally forgotten. I thought he was just like a those sort of throwaway, like
sidekicks.
Yeah, kind of sidekick characters, kind of like, and I always forget his name. The little wizard from He-Man.
Oh yeah, like, oh god,
is it like Ortho?
It starts with an O. Little wizard from He-Man. I just spelled He-Man. Hey, Orko. You mean Orko. Like I didn't know. I knew it all along. You mean Orko.
Oh, Orko.
Yeah.
I know him well. He's sort of like I don't know if it's like comedic relief.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of that trope of sort of the like Robin and they always had like a kid. So I think like I've read a lot about the thinking behind this was sort of like, oh, well, as a kid they'll relate more to another, fellow kid that's the sidekick to the big hero. But I don't know that kids ever really have thought that way. I think that's sort of an adult sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I hated Robin as a kid.
Oh, really, man? I liked him.
I mean, I think he's cool now.
Hey, I'm not talking about, what's his name?
Who? Damien?
Chris O'Donnell. I'm just saying, just Robin in general, dude. I kind of liked, I don't know. I thought he was cool. I mean, that's a common trope. I mean, Don Quixote. I mean, there's always like a little sidekick that's just kind of not quite getting it right sometimes.
Yeah, the Lone Ranger.
The opposite sometimes, where like the sidekick knows more than the main character. Wallace and Gromit, for example. Me and the kids were watching that the other day, and it's like the dog is always just kind of like, ugh.
So today we are talking about a topic that I'm actually pretty surprised that I'd never heard of this before. I felt originally like, well, maybe we had touched on it when we were covering some other topics, but I don't think we did.
Yeah.
And today we are talking about the Black Flash of Provincetown. So this is, oddly enough, while I was doing the research into this, I think we've covered the New England area maybe more than any other area.
Yeah, well, besides Australia, sure.
Yeah, that is true. That's true. So this comes from a lot of this. There's a great article about this on a site called ufoinsight.com. And they do a really, really good job of breaking down a lot of the sort of the timeline of things. But basically, this story sort of began in the fall of 1939. Well, I say that, but actually there's some other people that say that it actually goes back much, much earlier. But basically it started in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And it was sort of this thing that the kids began to claim to see. And they, the parents just kind of brushed it off as like, oh, well, it's just wild imaginations. And, Halloween is just around the corner. And, the nights are getting darker. And, these kids are just kind of scaring themselves. Because this was a time, much like when you and I, Woody, were kids, where we played outside all the time.
All the time.
We were not staring at screens. We were not, I mean, we had to come in when it was like completely dark. Not just like, oh, it's starting to get a little dark. We're talking like when the street lights came on. And these kids were basically claiming that, all around this area of Provincetown, which was around like 3,500. I've heard two things. I've heard 3,500 or 4,500 people.
Okay.
So pretty small, but I guess, kind of decent size for back then.
Just for geography real quick, because it doesn't sound like you're going to get into that for our international listeners and for our listeners that don't really know a whole lot about Massachusetts in general. Provincetown is basically a little town located at the extreme tip of Cape Cod. And it's like a coastal resort town now. It's actually like really cool in terms of arts that I found. It's like a very like heavy sort of art community, which is kind of cool. And I don't know if you want me to, I'll get back into the history of this town because I think that's going to be applicable and interesting here as we kind of dive into this this weird thing that these kids are seeing.
Basically, they were seeing this figure that was massively tall, and this will sort of be featured in the accounts from the children into the adult accounts as well, where it, some say anywhere from 8 to 10 to even one or two even said 12 feet. So this is a huge thing. He was always dressed in black, and which we're going to get into this I don't want to give up the ghost this early, but it had these sort of characteristics of what it would do that are kind of similar to some things that you may have heard before. It was known to sort of leap out of like bushes or leap out of, jump over these like hedges and, scare children. The kids would also claim to see glowing eyes. There were some accounts that they claimed to see that it had a metal or silver face.
Whoa.
With long pointed silver ears. Man. Which is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. Also, I'm looking at you, Copper Kid, because he also has this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was this really sort of terrifying things to the kids. And, like I said before, earlier on, the parents were just sort of thinking like, oh, well, they're just kind of scaring themselves and there's nothing to it.
Right.
Well, that would happen until the late October evening in 1939, where a woman by the name of Mary Costa, who was a local, she was walking through the town, and just as she passed the town hall, something leaped out of the cover of the bushes that was, I guess, up ahead of her. Mm-hmm. She would later claim that the menacing figure to be around 10 feet tall, with pointed silver ears and glowing blue eyes.
Jeez.
It simply stared at Costa for several moments. Then, with little warning as to when this strange creature had arrived, it leaped high and away from the area, continuing to jump and leap until it was out of sight.
Oh, okay, now, this is about as much as I kind of know. You kind of described this to me, and I was instantly like, yes, let's do that, but don't tell me anymore. I kind of want to learn it, as we're kind of diving into it in the studio. I did some research on Provincetown in general because I want to know the history and all that. But dude, immediately when Tyler told me just this amount of information, where he's like, okay, there's this entity or this person or something that's all dressed in all black. It's got pointy ears, and then blue glowing eyes, and then it's just leaping away and all this kind of stuff. I was like, dude, we had to have talked about this because this reminds me so much. Can I go ahead and say it?
Yeah, give it up.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
On June 14th, your favorite emotions are back on the big screen in Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2.
It's time to greet your Team Riley. It's anger.
Let me at him.
Fear.
Safety checklist is complete.
Disgust. Ew. Sadness is in the house.
Oh, no.
Hello, I'm anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions.
Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2.
There's a part 2? We're going!
Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That Would Be Rad.
I mean, it sounds exactly like Spring-Heeled Jack. Right?
It sure does.
I mean, there were I think that's why in our minds we're like, I mean, did we talk about this back then? I
don't know.
I don't think so. I think maybe if we did, it was just kind of in passing. And if you were interested in that episode, we covered it.
That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 19, Spring-Heeled Jack.
And just to give some context for folks that either haven't listened to that episode yet or will maybe after this one, I think it's important to note that Spring-Heeled Jack, the first sighting of him, was in 1837.
Yeah, right.
The last sort of known one, quote unquote, known one, or documented one was in 1904 in Liverpool.
Yep.
And here we are in, what'd you say, 1939, right?
Yes.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt just then, but I just want to remind everybody that that's exactly what I thought of whenever I heard that description.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. So she watched this thing just in terror. I mean, because think about this, the sun's going down, she's walking through town, but she's also in a very public place.
Yeah.
She's right in front of the town hall. probably at the center of town. And all of a sudden, this thing jumps out that's 10 foot tall. So almost double, presumably, almost double the height of this woman. Jumps out, scares her, and then with no warning, just leaps. And basically it says, I didn't really understand. At first, I thought she was saying that, like, it was like one big jump. But I think she's saying, because it says it leaped high and away from the area, continuing to jump and leap until it was out of sight. So I'm guessing it's just like a kangaroo hop.
Or I like to imagine those boots from the original Mario movie. With
the boot?
You don't remember come on, dude. I'm pretty sure we talked about this when we talked about Spring Hill Jack. Like in the original Mario movie with John.
Leguizamo.
Yeah. And
I thought you were going to talk about the moon boots from the 80s.
No. These things would just, that's how they jumped. It was so stupid and awesome at the same time.
Yeah. But yeah, I think he was just, like you said, just bouncing, which is one of the, in my opinion, is one of the really lame sort of write-offs of Spring Hill Jack too. They're like, oh, he just had springs attached to his feet.
Yeah, what is this, Roger Rabbit?
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like, 1939, Spring Hill Jack going all the way back to, what'd you say, 1837?
1837, yeah.
I find that very, very hard. I find that harder to believe than an actual, demon being able to jump. And so she's terrified, Mary Costa. She quickly makes her way to a nearby coffee shop. She could still see the light on. Several men in the shop went to see if they could track down the assailant, but they never could find him. She made the report to the local police, who were gracious enough to record the details, but didn't necessarily think of it, or didn't necessarily treat it with any sort of concern. You know what I mean?
We talked about this, I think, with Spring Hill Jack and then other sort of instances where there's a female that's kind of hysterical about something, and they're probably just well, she was probably, hey, hey, John, she's probably having that time again, you know what I mean?
Yeah, she's a woman. She's just emotional.
Yeah, she's just emotional.
Yeah.
God.
Well, and it is funny. This since you've already given up Spring Hill Jack, this is also very parallel to the Mad Gasser.
Yeah.
Yep. Which that wouldn't happen until 1941, but there are a good bit of similarities. And there's also a bunch of other ones that I'm going to get into here in a bit that I'd actually never heard of, which I think could sort of prove to be a pretty cool kind of take on it. But yeah, so they didn't really believe her, I don't think, And as you'll see too, a lot of the response from the police chief, ends up basically being exactly the same thing that they did with the Mad Gasser, where they're just they made up some story just to shut people up and get them, to get them to quit calling in.
Yeah, and not to say that their reaction was, wrong or anything like that, or even right, but I will say that, I think I am a different type of man than the 1939 version, right? But still, woman, guy, it doesn't matter. Someone comes to me, and says, there's this guy outside, and he was, 8 feet tall, and he was just bouncing up and down a way he scared me from the thing. His eyes were glowing blue. I'd be like, ooh, okay, well, sit down for a minute. It would be difficult for me to just take their word just right out of the gate. I think now, obviously, with the podcast and stuff, I'm a bit more open-minded than I would have been. But my initial reaction would have been like, I'll write down the details. You sound like you're having a psychotic break.
Yeah, it's very now. You're just getting emotional.
And again, I'm not trying to defend them, but they just, what else are you going to do?
Well, there is a period where they start to take it seriously. And so this would come in the weeks following Mary Costa's, her report. And basically there was a ton of reports that were essentially the same, and they were coming in on a daily basis. They were all telling of a mysterious figure dressed entirely in black. A lot of people would claim that its face was black, and it was almost like almost like a Grim Reaper type character. It usually had some sort of cape. Again, they all would mention glowing eyes. According to some, were red. According to others, they were sort of like a silver blue colored. There were, I guess, 50% of the people would claim to see these long silver pointed ears as well. And this is fascinating, as a weird buzzing sound, similar to a bee or a fly. To me, that's really interesting because, you know, you hear a lot of that with, you know, sleep paralysis. And I've actually encountered that in the one time that I've had sleep paralysis, where you do hear this like humming. I mean, it wasn't really like a high buzzing sound, but it was more like a sort of like a low kind of humming sound. But you do hear about that with a lot of the sort of UFO sort of accounts and stuff, abduction accounts, this sort of like buzzing or humming sound. So
I know we've talked about that in multiple episodes. So there's like that is one of those sort of, you know, red threads that lead back to this too. Connected anyway.
Yeah. They all claimed, every single one, regardless of if their descriptor changed from the next one, they all would claim that it could leap or jump at an incredible height. At least over like 10 feet tall.
Man.
Which is pretty much impossible, you know. I mean, unless you're just...
like 1939. I mean, there would have to be some real deal mechanical assistance here. You know, not just like a spring. I'm picturing like some giant spring. You know what I'm talking about? Like on the bottom of a shoe. And it's like, oh, there goes the professor again.
Yeah, right. I mean, I do kind of like, I don't really buy into this, but I do like the idea, especially with Spring-Heeled Jack, of that sort of, and the Mad Gasser, really, that sort of steampunk type
technology
thing. But I just, again, to me, that seems even harder to believe than
maybe,
you know,
I don't know. To me, I can't get it out of my head every time. I'm thinking like this hilarious sort of, this guy's trying to create like a superhero, like costume, uniform or whatever. And he's got all these gadgets and gear and he just can't get it right. And he's like trying to like, you know, talk to somebody and all of a sudden he pressed the wrong button. His eyes glowed blue and the lady's freaking out. He's like, no, wait. And then just boom, boom. He just like hops off into the distance and he just can't get it right, man. I don't know why. That just makes me laugh like crazy.
Well, you know, I think a lot of people would look at that as like, oh, well, some of the people would see, you know, red or orange glowing eyes. The others would see like a silver blue color. To me, originally I probably would have looked at that as like something to discredit them, maybe being like, oh, well, they're just making stuff up. And, you know, but since I had my own interaction whenever, you know, my now wife and I saw these orbs in my old loft, you know, there was a night where she would see, multiple times actually, where she would see something that was, we were looking at the exact same thing, but we were seeing completely different colors.
It turns out Tyler's colorblind. And just to give like a real quick recap of that story, you can listen to it.
That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 39, the Orb episode. We finally made it.
So all of the reports that came in were really pretty scary and pretty menacing, but mostly were all nonviolent. There was nothing that was really happening. You know, basically this dark cloaked figure or caped figure. That's another thing that I don't entirely understand. If they're are they saying like a cloak as in like a hood
cloak? I mean, that's what I would maybe assume.
Like a Grim Reaper
again,
kind of thing?
Here's the thing. I you know, longtime listeners, you know this. I love, and well, I say love. I unfortunately get obsessed over like some true crime stories, and you know, mostly just I kind of want to become a detective like Columbo, you know, secretly in my heart. But like, one of the things that I've kind of learned watching a lot of these things is like witnesses, to kind of go back to your point about like different colors and stuff, witnesses can observe the same event and have different descriptors of the same thing. That's part of the reason why, police and detectives get a lot of different statements so that they can kind of make a, almost like a, not a compilation. What would I,
like a composite?
Yeah, a composite sort of what went down, and certain details won't matter and others will. They don't do it in a way of being like, well, that guy said orange eyes and this lady said blue. It doesn't exist,
Yeah.
It's more of just like to get an idea of what was going on and paint the picture a little bit better. That being said, all that said, real quick, when they say cloak, when they say cape, I think there's just, it's one and the same potentially.
Yeah, right. I'm just trying to get a mental image, and I'm not.
See, like my mental image is Jamie Lee Curtis is walking down the sidewalk. There's bushes. This freaking hooded figure like leaps out. The hood maybe like falls back. It reveals these like silvery sort of Batman looking silver long ears.
Yeah. And
these glowing blue eyes. I don't know, man. It's scary as heck. But no violence yet, right?
Yeah, no violence. So as the reports would continue, a ton of different names would pop up. It would be known as the Blot, the Provincetown Phantom, the Phantom Fiend, the Black Phantom, the Devil of the Dunes.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. But the Black Flash was sort of the one that endured. So at this point, the police are kind of having a tough time keeping up because, well, one started as, Mary Costa and then, several a day. Now they're coming in like wildfire. People are seeing this thing all over the place. And what was weird about this, and this is another pretty fascinating part about this, they began getting these reports, within minutes of each other that were coming from multiple locations. So somebody at the far east of town would call and say, hey, I just saw this thing, it jumped, it jumped out of the bushes and scared me, and then it jumped off and disappeared. And then minutes later, they get another call all the way to the far west of the town that says the same thing. So it starts to maybe suggest that there's something maybe supernatural going on, for the open-minded folks, or maybe there's multiples of this thing. Mm-hmm. It's just really, really kind of interesting. I think that's a really cool, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, initially, like my mind goes to, okay, was it some sort of coordinated effort? Like, let's just say that you think these are just people that are just out to spook people, as they're going home or late at night or whatever. A bunch of rowdy kids, and they didn't have Nintendo Switch back then or Super Mario Brothers. They're going to go out there and they're just going to mess with people because that's, they're being mischievous. Okay.
Right.
So then now it's a coordinated effort. In 1939, I'm thinking too, 1939 is an interesting year, man, because like
all the war stuff.
Okay, so 1939, this is kind of, let's see, you said October, so it's the tail end of, or kind of coming closer to the end of the Great Depression.
Right.
And so like, you're talking about a time when like physicians, lawyers were selling freaking cigarettes on the side of the road, right next to kids that were like 4 or 5 doing the same thing, right? And so you're talking about a time when, hey, I don't think a lot of people are spending their quote-unquote free time that they probably didn't have to throw on a black cloak and go mess with people.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's just hard for me to kind of, it isn't, the 80s or the 90s or something when there was some abundance and people had time to just go people, basically,
Yeah, exactly.
And then like, how would they coordinate that back then as well? Like just a couple hoots and hollers?
Yeah. Right.
It's wild.
Yeah, and especially, and this is a theme that will sort of continue on with all, once I even get into these other, very sort of similar characters where it's like, what is the end goal? It's not like a Jack the Ripper scenario where you have this menacing thing jump out, but his intention is to murder or like assault. Maim or assault or God forbid, like sexual assault and stuff. You would think that like all this intention and thought going into, okay, well, if it is a person, we have to have a costume that gives the appearance that we're 10 to 12 feet tall. Let's say 8 to 12 feet tall. But there's a mask, there's ears, this thing, and then, the one common denominator is that every single person says that it's able to jump, 10 plus feet up into the air, and it just jumps away. So all of that going into this costume, as if that's even possible. I don't necessarily think it is in 1939, but just to have no sort of like end goal,
Yeah.
Like to me, that's the thing that's sort of like, well, yeah, but why?
Yeah.
So the majority of the, every single one of these reports that were coming in were all really scary, but none were violent thus far. Another common sort of aspect with this is he would always, and this is where this sort of like shot up pinged my thought back to like the idea of like the teleportation angle.
Okay.
Because a lot of folks were saying that it would jump out from somewhere but there was never like a clear hiding place. You know what I mean? It was like it would just jump out of view or like,
almost like just like appear out of nowhere kind of
just
thing?
kind of like it's appearing, yeah, which is really, really interesting. And there's also several accounts where as it was like sort of jumping off, it would just sort of just disappear, because a lot of times it was at night. And so was it truly just like hopping for miles, or was it just making one big jump and then just sort of disappearing into the ether,
It's weird that you said that about sort of like, now that my mind's on the teleportation side of things and then just kind of appearing out of nowhere, it now sounds more like Nightcrawler from the X-Men.
Yeah, right. It does.
Right? Bamf.
Yeah, Bamf, exactly. So there were only a few incidents on record that would suggest any type of violence. There was a local by the name of Charles Farley, same thing. It jumped out at him. He had a pistol. He fired his gun. He claimed that he was really close. I've heard sort of differing accounts. Some say 10 feet away. Some say 3 to 4 feet away. He shot it, and the creature laughed like a maniacal laugh, and then jumped over a high fence and disappeared.
Man.
Another witness would claim that he was backed into the corner, forcing him to lash out and, throw a punch at it. When he did that, the creature would, quote unquote, catch his fist in midair, apparently crushing his hand before tossing him to the ground. That's like straight up like a Batman type thing, And so one of the common things was, well, it apparently has some sort of superhuman strength. And then here's my favorite part, is that there were several accounts that were claiming that they would see it breathe or like blow out blue flames from its mouth.
Man.
Which is my favorite part. And the reason I say that is because in the reports of Spring-Heeled Jack, it says that he could breathe out blue and white flames and wore sharp metallic claws at the fingertips.
I swear, it's just so familiar, man.
I think it's familiar because it's...
Yeah, so similar.
Yeah, it's just like Spring-Heeled Jack, So there's this... I've listened to multiple podcasts this, and I cannot find this story anywhere. So I'm going to give my own sort of version of it. Apparently there's a story where there were 3 kids and they were playing out by the dunes. Like we said, in this area, it's sort of a coastal town. And, these kids are kind of playing out by the dunes. And they see, which I guess their house was pretty close by. And they end up seeing this thing. The one interesting thing is they claim to see it like crawling, which is
weird.
Real scary. Like it wasn't just sort of lumbering towards them. It was just sort of like crawling. And then I think once they realized that it started coming toward them, because they were playing hide and go seek, and they thought that, I think at first all of them thought that it was like somebody else. And then they all realized like at the same time, oh, wait a minute, this is...
Oh, God, that's terrifying.
Yeah, dude, it's so scary. So the kids run back into their house, they're hiding like behind like the kitchen or like under the kitchen, I don't know, like an island or something. And then they hear the doorknob like turning, and they hear it making noise outside of the door. And this is the part that feels a little weird because I feel like this would take a minute. But apparently, like, to the kid's quick thinking, he boils a pot of hot water while, which again, that seems weird. But apparently the kid boils a pot of hot water. The kids claim that they can hear it like laughing and making like taunting noises and like wiggling the handle of the door, knocking on the door, but never just like coming in, which is, it's an odd aspect to this. And I think
it's certainly odd, especially since, they would, depending on how much water they were using, it would take from around 2 to maybe 8 minutes to boil it.
Yeah, right.
So that's a long time of hearing a door rattle. Just to give you that example, we're now going to play 8 minutes straight of door rattling. We'll be back after that.
We'll return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no dead.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
So anyway, this, they boil this water, they run upstairs, and I guess there was like a window looking out over the door that this thing ended up pouring it on him. They hear this, like blood-curdling scream, and the thing just bounds off, jumping. Just disappears out into the dunes. So it's a weird, creepy kind of thing. Again, like, we've already brought up Spring Heel Jack quite a bit, but just to kind of get for those folks who haven't heard the episode, he was sort of the same thing. He was known to have a possible like metallic helmet, very tight-fitting, like white garment. He had eyes that resembled red balls of fire. He had a black cloak on, sharp metallic claws, very thin, and same kind of thing. He could jump massive heights. I guess the last sighting of him was him leaping over the rooftops of a housing estate near London.
I don't think you mentioned this just then, but Spring Heel Jack primarily mid to late 1800s, Southern England.
Yes, right.
So it wasn't U.S.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing too is much like the Black Flash of Provincetown, Spring Heel Jack, there weren't really any violent encounters, other than there were a couple things where he would jump out,
rip their clothes or something.
Yeah,
like that.
he would like rip women's like clothes or blouses or whatever. I think there were a couple that where he would sort of like slash like fabric on like a coat and stuff. But there was never like a full on, attack or assault. So it kind of leads you to believe, like, well, maybe there was another motive. A lot of people believe that the Spring Heel Jack, was a flesh and blood entity. And whereas with this thing, I think they were full on kind of looking at this thing as some sort of creature. I don't think Spring Heel Jack was ever known for being like ungodly tall, because my initial thing was like, well, this kind of does make sense for late 1800s to, 18 or
you're talking almost 1939, 1830, what was it?
1837.
So like 102 years previous.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're looking at it like some sort of supernatural.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, thing. Unless, and we'll talk about like what we think's going on here, but like, yeah, I mean, something that's that similar that spans over 100 years.
Yeah,
it can't be the same guy. At the very least, it can't be the same person.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And I was thinking that it was there was some sort of like possible tie-in, and same with the Mad Gasser, who was around in 1941, 1939, 1941. I mean, that's like over in Illinois. So
yeah,
those are pretty close.
Yeah. Just in case, because I knew we might kind of connect some dots there. For those listening, the Mad Gasser it's known as the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, and that's in Mattoon, Illinois, 1944.
That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 18, The Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Mattoon, Illinois, and Provincetown are about approximately 1,200 miles apart. Not that would put, a huge, it's not, in other words, it wouldn't be conceivable necessarily to have a sighting in Provincetown and then Mattoon like on the same night, for example, because unless the springs can get them there that far.
Yeah, but I mean, if there's a teleportation,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So the chief of police, Anthony Tarvers, would state that the black flash sightings were merely a prank by 4 boys.
Come on, Tony. Tony Tarvers.
Yeah, old Tony, Uncle Tony Tarvers, that were local to the area. According to his statement, which wasn't technically official, he said that he knew the identity of one of the boys, and so he would speak to him and his parents, and around this time is when the sightings stopped. So, I would imagine that old Uncle Tony probably, I don't think any of this is true, but I could see him making up this thing and saying, oh yeah, I talked to the parents and they put an end to it real quick.
Sounds like Uncle Tony sounds like he's the guy.
Oh, he could be the guy, yeah. He claimed that the boys would split into 2 groups. This is hilarious. Basically the Little Rascals trick where one would be on the other one's shoulders.
Yes.
And then they would cover themselves with a large black cape and then use a flour sifter as a mask.
Okay.
Magically, though, 2 boys, one boy on the other one's shoulders, somehow that boy was still strong enough to jump 10 plus feet into the air. So I'm not sure.
Well, let's just say that let's just say the lady was hysterical and it's an over-exaggeration and it's just 1 foot up into the air, a tenth of what she said.
Yeah, right.
And this kid has got somebody on their shoulders, and then they jumped a full foot off of the ground, without just toppling over, by the way.
And also having the ability to be shot with a pistol at close range and then just laugh.
Now, the boiling water did get him, though.
I mean,
forget about bullets.
That is true.
I think what we learned here is this. If there's somebody jiggling your door handle for at the very least 8 minutes, don't worry about getting the gun out, man. Get that hot plate out. Get you a pot of water going. The theme is this. Always be ready to have ramen or to dump that hot water on a scary intruder.
Man, I do love ramen.
We're just giving them gold today, man.
Yeah.
Well, can I tell you, I know you wanted to talk about some potential similarities and that kind of thing. It's interesting that you say all that and some of the things you said because I kind of found a little something too.
Ooh.
But first, it's going to require me to kind of get into some history here, all right?
Okay.
This is something I did not know. Now, whenever you think of, the Pilgrims and the Mayflower and all this kind of stuff, the first thing that comes to mind is what? History award.
Indians.
Okay. Plymouth Rock, man. Okay.
Oh.
Right?
That's not the first thing I think
of.
of.
In terms of like, where did they go? They landed where? Plymouth Rock.
Yes.
Is the first thing I always think of. The truth is, Provincetown was actually the very first place that they landed. They were kind of
wait. What?
Yeah. So they basically came into the Cape of Cape Cod. So when the Pilgrims were on the Mayflower, they were first greeted because of the way that it's shaped, the sandy shores of Provincetown. They had just gotten done with this like extremely difficult 2-month journey across the Atlantic. Now, again, for our international listeners and for people that just kind of forgotten history, Tyler, I know you got the history wars, so you probably remember this just perfectly.
Sure.
These are folks that are like seeking refuge from like, they want some religious freedom here, and they're on a boat. They're willing to just be on a boat for 2 months. And I got to tell you, that sounds like a nightmare.
It sounds like hell.
I mean, I get seasick real easy. Also, where's everybody going to the bathroom? It's just disgusting. Okay, anyway. Yeah. So they've been on this long journey. They see these like beaches of Provincetown. And before they went ashore, basically, men from the ship, that's when they signed the Mayflower Compact, which, would then serve later as a model for the founding fathers and stuff. But once they were on the land, most of the women were like cleaning the soiled clothing, and the men were kind of exploring, kind of not too far inland, but they found some corn and had like a small skirmish with some of the Native American tribes there. And then the following month, dude, like a month later, is when they moved to Plymouth. So super interesting situation here. Now, when I started looking into the history of this and stuff, and I read that thing about Native Americans, I wonder if there might be some sort of Native American tie-in of something similar to this that we're talking about.
I can think of nothing cooler than that.
Yeah. And here's what I found. There were a couple different tribes that were in that area, but one of the most prominent was the Wampanoag, okay? And you've probably heard us talk about them before because they have, what's the little like...
the Pukwudgies?
Yes, that's it, the Pukwudgie, right? These little...
History Award.
History Award. They're... the Pukwudgies were like the little, almost like...
like gnomes almost?
Yeah, gnomes, like little people in the...
Although some of them were known as like being like hairy, I think.
Yeah.
Almost like little Bigfoot. Big feet.
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of their other traditions talks about this thing called the Hobomok or the Chepi. Okay? Now listen to this, man. The Chepi or the Hobomok is a most treacherous and hideous being. Hobomok lurks in the nighttime shadows. Some people would not go out alone at night for fear of an encounter with this frightful fiend. He is their boogeyman, the equal to, and as they converted to Christianity, they would then refer to the Hobomok as devil. According to their traditions, those who were in harmony with their fellow beings and seeking the presence of the Great Spirit in their lives didn't have any cause to be intimidated by Hobomok. Again, sometimes they called him the Chepi, which translates to mean ghost. This evil phantom was the source of pain, sickness, emotional distress, frequently material. Listen to this, dude. I saw this, and whenever you were talking about this like teleportation stuff, full body chills here. He frequently materializes in various grotesque apparitions, including, now this is where it gets a little scary, impersonations of departed loved ones or enemies, always dressed in dark clothes.
Wow.
Yeah. And
dude, that's fascinating.
Dude, and it's right here. This lore comes from this area. Now, fast forward, what is that? I don't know, over 300 years later, right? And now we have people in this small town seeing something pretty dang similar. Now, I'm not saying people didn't give a crap about Native American lore and history in 1939, but also I'm kind of saying that. You know? Like, in other words, this isn't somebody that's just like, oh, I think I saw that, and it reminds me of something that I read, last night, and it scared me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So immediately, whenever I read that, I thought, oh, man, I wonder. Because initially, you find that easy comparison with Spring Hill Jack. And you think to yourself, okay, well, now we know it's 102 years can't be the same person. But my mind also goes to, and I think we talked about this in that episode as well as the Mad Gasser. What if there was like a fraternal organization of these people who, again, wanted to just spend their time scaring others? Weird, but okay. Maybe that's how it could be 102 years apart.
So that's fascinating that you said that, because I did some other research, and I'm not going to get too heavy into this because this is probably its own episode here, but have you ever heard of the Spectre Leaguers of 1692?
Not at all.
So in this area of Gloucester, right in the middle of all the witchcraft accusations of New England, apparently there was this, they were invaded by these spectral company of soldiers that were known to come out of the swamps or cornfields. They were always in a group. They would approach, soldiers that were on guard. Every single time that the actual soldiers would shoot their guns, the bullets had zero effect. It always seemed like nothing ever happened. The bullets, never did anything. Their speech was in an unknown tongue. They did carry guns that apparently did have real bullets, because they would dig them out of trees, after they would disappear. The alarm of this became so great that Major Samuel Appleton of Ipswich sent about 60 men on the 18th of July for the town's assistance under these inexplicable alarms, which they had suffered night and day for about a fortnight together. So you got to think, man, like around this particular garrison in Gloucester, these sort of spectral characters are coming. They were known to have, they were all white waistcoats, white breeches, white everything. They were just these they claimed that they were, the devil and his agents. Cotton Mathers even gets into this. He was a sort of a big figure in the the Salem witch trials and stuff. They actually talk about Cotton Mathers in the Legend of Sleep.
Scream 1.
Do they? Oh
no,
yeah,
I'm kidding.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Even Cotton Mather would comment about how he saw a number of rollicking apparitions dressed like gentlemen in white waistcoats and breeches, kept Gloucester and the neighboring towns in a state of feverish excitement and alarm for a whole fortnight together. There was a guy by the name of Ebenezer Babson who was staying in a home with the rest of his family. Almost every single night would hear noises as if some people were walking or running around the house or in the house. And it would sound like, he would even claim that it would sound like marching, but we're talking like a full troop of soldiers marching. And then one night when he was out really late, when he returned home, and this is fascinating, he saw two men coming out of his own front door. What? And then, when they saw him, they ran swiftly, out of the house into the adjoining cornfield and then completely disappeared. When he went in, he immediately questioned his family, who were sitting up reading, sitting by the fire, and they promptly replied that no one had been there all night.
Man.
Which is is that like an alien abduction type thing? I mean, that's so bizarre.
Man. I mean, and then too, this area of our country, again, for the benefit of the international listeners, first off, we're probably even saying Provincetown wrong, because in Massachusetts,
for sure.
it's probably like, I don't even remember. Anyway, so if we're saying some of these places incorrect, our apologies. Our Massachusetts listeners will let us know what we did wrong, for sure, in a good way. We always love that stuff.
Well, I specifically...
I can't even do it. I can't do the accent.
No. I specifically looked up what looks like Gloucester, but it's actually just pronounced Gloucester.
You understand what I'm saying, folks? Okay. So even this area of our country is to us, one of the oldest parts of our country in terms of the architecture, and because this is kind of where the Pilgrims first came and settled. This is in terms of any sort of, what would you call it, European influence, oldest, right? Well, I mean, that's not true either. The Spanish forts and stuff in other places. But I'm just saying, it is a perfect setting for scary stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so as you're describing that, I'm just like in my mind visualizing these like old, rickety sort of like homes. And this guy's just like kind of off on their own, down some lonely dirt road. Because, back then too, it wasn't like it is now where you're just like, you can spit out your window and it'll hit your neighbor's house.
Right.
It was spread out,
Yeah.
And so, God, and just to think that, these guys dealt with in this relatively kind of close to the same area, basically a ghost army.
Yeah. I mean, this really is, some would call this like an invasion. And I've still got a little bit more I want to get into with this. But, I mean, they claimed that they were just completely being invaded for several days.
Man.
Which is wild. One of the things about this, before we move on, so Babson, the gentleman that came home and he saw the two men come out his front door and then his family's sitting in there and they have no idea. Mm-hmm. He runs after he asks his family, he grabs his gun, runs back out. So originally he saw two men. Then when he runs back outside, he sees three men just stand up from behind a fallen log. And then they run off into the swamp.
Good Lord.
And so this is a thing that is really interesting to me. This idea of, and this, the reason I bring this up is there's a lot of sort of parallels between the Mad Gasser, the Black Flash, the Spring-Heeled Jack, and these characters, which again, it's right in that same area where they come out and they do something and then they run off in a short distance almost to have someone like chase them. And if this is sounding familiar, if you know where I'm going with this, I'm going to bring up our pal Tim Marchenko's book, Disembodied Voices.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just this common idea that sort of runs through all these stories of, okay, this thing's coming out or it's making a noise or it's, doing something to get our attention, and then it sort of runs off into the woods. And my thought is, like Tim states in the book, is it just like a trap? So you go running after this thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like trying to lure you in.
Yeah, like luring you in.
Yeah, and it kind of like to go back into the Hobomok or the Wampanoag lore, that entity, that represents their like evil thing. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention also is like in some of their tales, this thing, this cheapie, would also like peel back the eyelids of adults, man, so that they could never sleep again. I mean, just my God, weird stuff, dude. So
that's crazy.
I started thinking about this, and it's something that we kind of get to every now and then when we talk about these like sort of old. The old world or the old world lore and all this kind of stuff. And it's this thing kind of like in Neil Gaiman's American Gods. It reminds me of these like old gods, with a lowercase g. And we talk about this kind of stuff. We end up talking about this theme, I think, nearly every episode unless we're talking about old toys that I found. And that is that like by talking about something and exploring it and thinking about it, you're kind of like bringing life to that in some way.
Yeah.
And, just for an example, us talking about the Black Flash, but us talking about the cheapie are these like old gods that are kind of like sticking around and like appearing every now and then. Maybe they have their own set of rules that they have to sort of abide by, or not just rules necessarily, but like constraints and or structure, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I know this to the casual listener who got hooked on our show because we were talking about the 80s last week, and now we're talking about the cheapie. I understand that it can seem kind of like far out and out there. But like Tyler was saying, our fascination with this historical lore and then fast forwarding 300 plus years later, and even more than that, where people in 1939 in this small town at the tip of Cape Cod are experiencing this. Man, that's just fascinating as heck to me. But I think we should let's get into what we think is going on here, or some of like our thoughts and ideas about it.
Okay.
Besides like the potential of it being, a manifestation of like an old god or something like that.
Yeah. To sort of lean into like what you were just saying, I kind of had that same thought as far as like, okay, you have these things. Are these things just, you kind of hinted at like the idea of like the tulpa almost, or like, by us talking about this, are we keeping this like sort of memory alive, and not just figuratively, but are we keeping it alive like on like some sort of molecular level, if you will, where we're giving thought to it, we're giving our energy into it by just thinking about it and talking about it, and our enthusiasm and emotions. Like, are we actually like somehow pouring into these things? And so it's funny that you brought that up, because I had the same thing. I started thinking of, are these just sort of more modern versions of the trickster archetype, like Loki, like, and there's a whole list of characters. I mean, here's some that I was thinking of that I feel like could be, I don't know, they maybe not all the characteristics, but a lot of these share these characteristics. So, like the idea of like shadow people. I've had an encounter with this when I was a kid. Absolutely terrifying. This thing walks across, and the Hat Man, they're kind of the same, one and the same, just different silhouettes. This thing was in my bedroom, walked over, and just stood at the end of my bed while I was in absolute like terrified, like absolutely terrified. And so my idea is there a component to this that's just about like, is it like feeding on like just the fear?
And it goes like Pennywise.
Kind of like Pennywise. And it goes to the story, if we're taking this as a factual account of like the kids, that were in the dunes, they run to their house. Here's this thing jiggling this handle of the door, banging on the door, laughing, sort of taunting for like 8 minutes until water boiled. So
Which reminds me, I think this is a great place to play 8 minutes. I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead.
And so it's that idea that like the intention was never to actually hurt the people or hurt the kids, but it was that it needed that response, that fear response to like give it.
It's almost
power.
like they're harvesting that fear,
Absolutely.
like growing or like sowing the seeds of fear so that it can continue to be relevant or exist in some way. Man, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
So you have Spring-Heeled Jack, you have the Mad Gasser. You also have this other character called the Phantom Stabber, which was in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1926, who kind of did the same thing. It's crazy. There were like 26 attacks. It's kind of hard to find some stuff about it, but a lot of the attacks were like the same kind of thing. It was just like this character was in a cloak, and this dark cloak would come up and just like at most would, wrap its hands around somebody's throat, or like slice their arm, or like stab them in the leg. Like, it's stuff that like is clearly not intended to like kill the person.
Yeah.
So is it just, and then like the Mad Gasser, like we said, in 1941, Illinois.
Yeah, it didn't kill anybody. It could have, like crazy.
It could have killed somebody, but it feels like it's, I don't know, I just feel like if the intention was to kill someone, it would be pretty easy.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? If you have a knife and you're able to get close enough to put your hands around the person's throat, if you wanted to do real damage, you could. But in this same kind of area, Dover, Massachusetts, the Dover Demon. We have like I said, the Phantom Stabber, that was 1926 in Bridgeport. The Spectral Leaguers, which I just talked about, in 1692, same kind of thing. All these accounts, and I want to do a show on them, like a full show, because it's a pretty extensive.
Sounds like we got it.
Well, no, dude, it gets a lot deeper.
I know. I'm just kidding.
But the weird, there's other weird things about it, and I'm not going to give it all away. But there's
just don't.
Well,
if we're going to do a show about it, then we'll do a
listen
show.
Though. Listen to this account, because this is like, this is something that plays into the idea of teleportation, or the idea of bilocation, if you will. So there's accounts with these Phantom Leaguers, and again, this is 1692, where a person would see 3 of these soldiers, all dressed in all white. He would shoot one, and all 3 would fall to the ground at the same time, as if they were all shot.
Weird.
Yeah, and there's all these weird little things like that immediately made me think that it's something tied together. There was, in Czechoslovakia in 1939, there was a character called the Spring Man, and they called him Parak. And he was literally the exact same thing as Spring Heel Jack.
And this guy almost.
And this guy.
Like. And there was in the same year, too.
Yeah, right. This one's a little darker. There was one called the London Monster in 1788. Over 30 accounts. I think a couple people actually did die with that one. But the same kind of thing, like, jumping out, grabbing people, like slashing them kind of thing.
Boy.
The Halifax Slasher in 1938. He was a character who would do the same thing, but was known to, he never did like any real damage, but he would like slice like people's like legs.
God,
and some people claim to see like knives attached to his knees. It's really weird. And then we get into, 1966 New Jersey, the Grinning Man, which is another kind of character where these kids see this dude on the other side of a fence. They're walking home at night under like a big street light, and they see this character who doesn't. I mean, to me this feels different, but I feel like the motives feel similar, where he has a smile, a grin that's like bigger than his face.
Ooh, God.
Yeah. There's no.
Why do we got to talk about this stuff so late at night?
Yeah, no. There's no ears, no nose.
Okay. Whoa.
Yeah, it gets weird. It's weird.
This face has. Oh no.
What?
It just sounds scary, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah. But again, it's all these things, and it ties into, like I said, I made a list. We have the Black Monk of Pontefract. I think we've talked about him.
Never heard.
We
of
have the Bell Witch. That's definitely supernatural, but there's a lot of that same like feeding with fear kind of thing. You have the Mothman. You have the Phantom Clown phenomenon, where these people would just see these clowns and they would just stand there, and it's like, Sam the Sandown Clown, I think, can even fit into this. The Harlequin, and then, like I just said, the Grinning Man, which somehow ties into Indrid Cold, but I've never quite seen the connection of those two, so I don't know. But basically, all that to say, I think the motive isn't to actually like hurt people. I think it's to just draw out this sort of fear response for some reason.
Yeah, harvest that fear, man. I like that. When I say I like that, folks, please understand that I don't mean, hey, man, that, good on you. I mean, like, that's a cool concept. I mean, it's an interesting way to think about this outside of, because on one hand, like, I also think it's equally fascinating to think of this fraternal organization of weirdos. I mean, because there are weird people out there that get their kicks out of some weird shit.
Yeah, right.
And so, like, it doesn't always have to be killing, but, some of those killers, like in these true crime things, I say they kind of test the waters a little bit, and like so many, I go back to this almost every time. Look, now you guys know why I don't want my blinds open. Yeah. Because I don't want some grinning man or a freaking,
same.
You know what I mean? And I think sometimes I wonder, like, how come we don't hear more about this kind of stuff? I truly do think a large part of it has to be the fact that, like, you're gonna get shot, man. If you try to just like peep outside of somebody's window, there's a high chance that you're just gonna, if you're doing it in my house, I mean, I'd probably fight you first.
Oh,
but like if I'm
shooting you 100%.
I don't know, man. You just don't hear a lot about like people going to such great lengths,
right?
Nowadays, right? Like full get up and jumping and hopping 10 feet and looking, you know what I mean?
So I did have this other thought, and I mean, it's really far-fetched, and I'm kind of thinking with my science fiction brain, but I like the idea of, especially with these, like the Spectre Leaguers of 1692, like there's there's some things where, people would say that they almost looked like they were glowing. One of the characters had like a gun over his shoulder that he pulled out that was like, he called it a bright gun, so it was like glowing. So it's almost like, my storyteller brain kicked up the idea of like, well, what if they're like from the future, you know, and
now you're talking about language.
Yeah, I know. I knew you'd like this. That's what I'm bringing up. And the idea of like, okay, well, you shoot one, and then there's 3 of them, and then they all fall exactly in the same way. Is that just some sort of like hologram type thing? And these characters that come in and just, you know, will just like slice someone's leg or, you know, tear someone's clothes. Are they doing that just enough to get like a DNA sample to take back?
Man, that's a great thought. Here's another thing.
I know.
When there are like moments like that, like the one you're talking about, the Phantom Leaguers, who one gets shot, all 3 of them fall down. Sometimes I think of that, and this is a perfect example, dude, of imagine, you know, let's just say we've formed a company. It's called, you know, Rad Incorporated, and we invented a time machine. But like, how do we know if it works? How do we know if this guy, if it just, you know, makes a lot of noise and he comes back instantly? And how do we know that guy really went back? Well, it's easy. He's going to go and do this on this day, and then we'll be able to read about it later in history. You see what I'm saying? So like, it's their experiment of not causing anybody
I see what you're
physical harm, but like, you know, whether or not there's some psychological harm there that, you know, I'm sure those people are like that guy, but them taking DNA samples to see if maybe, you know, was there anything different about our DNA back then? Yeah, whatever it is, dude. I mean, that is, I like that.
Well, and also it kind of brought me into, you know, specifically like the buzzing noises and specifically the 2 men walking out of the house. And then the people right there in the living room were like, "What are you talking about?" It's that like sort of Men in Black. And I don't mean like the Will Smith version, but the actual Men in Black, you know, where they're able to, I mean, that's where, you know, they get it in those sort of, I think it was originally like a comic or whatever, but, you know, they have ways of making people like forget things. But I don't know, I think there could be something to, if we're looking at this like from the lens of like the disembodied voices. And I never thought, once I started doing the research on this, I never thought that, you know, this road would lead there. But
most roads do.
Yeah, most roads do, actually, yeah. And again, if you guys haven't picked up the book by Tim Marchenko, Disembodied Voices, get out there now and pick it up because it's awesome. But if you're looking at it through that lens, I do like this idea of like this thing like running off in hopes that the people will like give chase and go after it. So are they going to run off into the woods to find it? You know,
I just keep on coming back to like, okay, let's just say, yeah, man, I don't know. Like, you know, I keep on coming back to like, why would somebody just like jump out, you know, in the middle of a crowd only to like spring away fast enough to where like, I mean, surely they didn't think that, well, this lady's going to chase me. I'm leaping 10 feet at a time.
Yeah.
I feel like it's either something that is doing something significant enough to make waves that they can kind of prove, aha, I was there, time travel. Or maybe it's that, you know, entity trying to stir up some fear so it can be relevant and exist. Or maybe it's just some jackass with a cape that wants to scare women.
Who's a mad scientist. And has figured out a way to jump 10 feet in the air. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many different directions you could go with this story, but I'm so happy
that you found this, man, because like not only does it make me think about all those other cool stories in previous episodes, but it's just like you know, I love it when we can get into some Native American lore, and I don't know, man, that's just an interesting time. That there's the pre-internet, pre-technology, even, you know, like we always talk about 80s and 90s, but I mean, you know, early 1900s, 1600s, you know, colonial America, those time periods, man, there's like, I don't know, man, I think there's just like some untapped creatures and ghosts and goblins and all kinds of stuff that I look forward to diving into on our show.
Yeah, for sure.
Close your blinds, lock your doors. Please don't walk by yourself late at night.
Yeah. Especially you over-emotional ladies out there.
God, we all know how like you like to spin a yawn.
If you want to find us, you can over on Instagram. That's where the bulk of our social media presence is. Drop us a DM if you want to tell us about a story or your own paranormal encounter. jump in the comment section. If it's more of like a long form thing, shoot it over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Even better than all those things, head on over to thatwouldberadpodcast.com, our website, where it's sort of a one-stop shop. You can leave us reviews. You can jump on any podcatcher and listen to the show. You can do all the things. And what's even cooler is if you do want to tell us your story, which we would absolutely love to hear it, with your permission, we'd love to play these on the show. Mm-hmm. It's one of our favorite things. And we sort of stockpile these and release them sort of intermittently. Yeah. But if you'd like to do that, you can record the voice memo on the site and it comes directly to us. So that's really cool. Get out there, tell one single friend about the show. If you've got time, leave us a 5-star review. Sorry again about the Copper Kid situation. Mm-hmm. If you aren't getting enough in the regular feed and you want just a little bit more, head on over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. Mm-hmm. We always have a good time over there. It's loosey-goosey, and it's just sort of a continuation of this, just later at night. And I guess that's about it. You got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
Oh, when are we kicking in Camp Rad Strangeness this year?
I would say first episode of June. So coming up pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly. All right, we'll get those sleeping bags ready, and we can't wait. So, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Request granted.
Because like what the I don't want to go down this rabbit trail, but I'm gonna. Like I said something. Oh, like I have these things. Same with my wife, but we'll like say these phrases from things that we like, and we expect just the world to either understand what we're talking about or know them. So the other day I said something like, everyone knows the moon's made of cheese. And the kids are like, what? And it's from like some like episode of Wallace and Gromit that I watched when I was a kid. Anyway, so I
wouldn't have got that. Yeah. I always felt like those, I appreciate them now as an adult, but I don't know. Hey, speaking of new cartoons, and I know we're really we're really off to a slow start, but I do got to say this: I can't think of his name, probably because I can never pronounce his name. But the guy that is responsible for like the Samurai Jack show and then Primal, he just came out with a show, and I haven't seen it yet because I've kind of been slammed. But it's called Unicorn Warriors Eternal or Eternal Warriors. Hold on.
Probably should figure it out before you announce it on a show, Unicorn. Don't even bother, man. I'm cutting it.
It's called Unicorn Warriors Eternal, and man, it looks really cool.
Sounds awesome, man. Cutting
it. Okay, thanks. What are you talking about? No,
if you go to the hey man, I don't know if you know this, we have a website now.
Oh, I thought you were talking about our Instagram.
Okay, Grandma.
God Almighty, what's happening here?